Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's great. We get to look at a Michigan game, which is kind of interesting. Feels like we're still a week away from having an actually interesting Michigan game to look at. And it's really, Tony, starting to feel to me like this might be a 3-game Big Ten season where Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State just sort of play a round robin, and whoever wins 2 games there wins the Big Ten East and thus the Big Ten.
And likely goes to the playoffs. And this is our Michigan Monday episode of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. And really, any Michigan Monday, any weekend where you don't have to watch Michigan play Iowa or Connecticut or Colorado State or Hawaii it's a better week than those. And this weekend, the Wolverines went to Indiana and beat up on the Hoosiers 31-10. The game was 10-10 at the half. Both teams had a field goal blocked in that game. And then, of course, Michigan shut Indiana out in the second half, outscoring the Hoosiers 21-0 over the third and fourth quarters, which is kind of what Michigan does. It's close for a little bit, and then they eventually outdistance the opponent, and then in the fourth quarter they really do the stomping. But overall, I don't think Michigan should have been so close in the first half, but I feel like we can just maybe whitewash all of the offensive struggles that were going on due to the Mike Hart situation, the collapse, the seizure there, where and he's back in Ann Arbor now doing better, still some testing to go on, but like once that happens, the demeanor, the attitudes, the focus, it's understandable if it goes away for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, over the weekend there was a lot of talk about how you couldn't really hold a sluggish performance against Texas A&M against Alabama because they didn't have Bryce Young, and I mean, I kind of agree with that to a certain point. This feels very much like, yeah, it was kind of a sluggish, crappy first half for Michigan. I don't think you can hold any of that against them because they are human beings. They have feelings. They are, they have people they are close to. And when you see something very scary happen to someone right in front of you and you're dealing with the uncertainty that comes with that, like, well, you are going to naturally, as a human being, be impacted by that probably a little bit. And that's going to impact your performance a little bit, whether you want it to or not. And, you can have, brave conversations about compartmentalizing things and, keep it fighting on. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's just, we're people. We are allowed to be worried about people who, if something scary happens to someone right in front of you, especially. So, yeah, I think you kind of have to just sort of put an asterisk on anything from the first half. And, I'll have positive things to say and negative things to say, but just rest assured, there is an implied asterisk on any kind of negative anything we say, especially about the offense and especially about the first half as we go through things today.
And really, talking about the Michigan offense, they put up 469 yards of offense, so it's not like they were bad. Normally, like you look at what Blake Corum did, 25 carries for 124 yards. The first carry that he had was a 50-yarder. So 24 for 74 after that. But again, like the focus probably not where it would be expected to be, and that's fine. What I have a concern about, Tom, and I tweeted about this, and you let me know if this is some game playing by Michigan or if this is just how predictable they are. I think they lined up in pistol 11 times, ran all 11, and lined up in shotgun with the running back even with the quarterback about 30 times and threw it 29 of those times. The only time they ran with the running back even with the quarterback is when they were backed up on their own 1-yard line and they're looking for yardage to get some room to punt. So as I'm looking at this, and then even with the offset, like the shotgun with the running back a little bit behind, off to the side, but a little bit behind, they ran on those 13 of 15 plays, I believe. So it's anytime J.J. McCarthy is not under center, this Michigan offense, at least this game, like I'll have to go back and see didn't really have time this weekend to see exactly, is this the norm or is this a one-game sample size? I don't feel like it's a one-game sample size, but I also don't know if it was this skewed to where you can watch this game and when they're in shotgun or pistol and have about a 98% certainty of whether this is going to be a run or a pass. Is this a trap for Ohio State?
No, it is definitely not a trap for Ohio State. It is a trap for Penn State. That to me absolutely stinks of, we know we're going to beat this team, so we can do a bunch of stuff that is very predictable, and we can just, our offensive line is going to be able to push their defensive line around. So even if they know what's coming, we'll still probably be able to move the ball enough, and their offense is not very good, and we'll get plenty of pass rush, so we won't have to, they're not going to put up a lot of points, so it'll be fine. We can sort of set some stuff up, and then next week when we actually need it in what Ryan Day calls the talent is equated kind of games, okay, then you can, once you have tendencies, then you can break those tendencies against teams where you actually need to do something. I mean, the most telling thing to me right there is the only time they broke the tendency was when they were backed up to their own end zone and they were really in a little bit of danger, and then they broke the tendency. Like that tells me they are very aware of the tendency, and you're only you're only doing things that are very much a tendency if you're aware of that tendency, if you plan to go against that tendency at some point in the future when you need it more.
It's just so overt. Like they're like, look at this hand, look at this hand, look at this hand, and you focus on that hand, and then I'm with you. Like they can't do the same thing against Penn State. So I would expect some differences there. It'll be interesting to see exactly how different, because I still think there's some predictability to the Michigan offense, but this was just, you're kind of giving them the play sheet, or at least the run or the pass part of it, and letting them know this is what's coming. And then, as you said, I think that's it's bait for Penn State, and we'll see exactly how that goes about. J.J. McCarthy, 28 of 36, 304 yards, 3 touchdowns, no sacks, had an interception in the end zone, which you hate to see, forced the ball, got it tipped and picked off on a carom. And games like this that are close at that point, when you're losing possessions in that spot, that's dangerous. He didn't fumble the ball this week, which is good, but he did bobble it once on a run. But we were on the road this weekend and talking to several members of the OSU beat talking about football, and there's this thought that comes up that J.J. McCarthy is overrated. Some people see him as overrated. I maybe that thought is out there because we talk about him highly. Maybe, Tom, we are the voice of reason, and other people are thinking that we're blowing this dude up too high. But I thought he was really good again, really, really good on the move. And that's more than just scrambling. That's keeping his eyes downfield, looking for crossers and second reads and things like that. I think he's just getting better and better, but he is still taking some shots that he shouldn't in terms of throwing the ball that he shouldn't. And he's still not accurate on the deep stuff. It almost feels like he's more accurate on the move than he is in the pocket throwing deep at this point.
Yeah, I think you ended up touching on a lot of my notes on McCarthy there. I'm just going to run through them real quick. I mean, and I will start all of this by saying, yes, he was very good on the whole. It was a very good performance. It was his first 300-yard performance, which I heard that in the broadcast, and I thought, is that right? That can't be right, because, covering Ohio State, it feels like 300 yards is sort of like you get off the bus, and then you have 300 yards passing, and then the game starts. And so, yeah, this is his first 300-yard game passing. 28 for 36 and 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, and then the 1 interception. He's been very good. He was a little off early, where even on the completions in that first drive, like the first ball, I think it was to AJ Henning, he threw it and it was real low, and there wasn't a ton of pressure on him. It was just like he just missed. And if he had caught Henning in stride, he probably was running for a while. Instead, Henning had to go down and get it. There was another one where it was a sideline ball, and it was not a real tight window, and he just the guy had to make a great catch falling out of bounds in order to get it. He was pretty good when, a lot of his throws were just to wide open guys. And when the guys were open, he was hitting people. When there was coverage, it got a little dicier, and he still forces balls. This is the third time this year I was really surprised that was his first interception, because in my head had a couple, because he's had a couple balls that he's forced into the end zone, and it's like always right before halftime he's forcing balls into the end zone, and one of them almost got picked off a couple weeks ago. One of them, I think they were both incomplete. There were a couple where he's done that, and he had the interception then against in this situation where that was just a bad throw. There were three guys there, and one of them got a hand on it, and another guy picked it off, and it was second down. It was second down. They're up. It was 10-10 at that point. Like, if you kick a field goal there, it's not the worst situation in the world. You're in the red zone. You're in field goal range. Don't give away points. And it's only second down, so you've got another down to play with. Like, that was not a ball that needed to be forced in there. But he's, I think he's just right now in the point of his career where the world is his oyster. He's invincible. He can do anything he wants. And, he is going to just sort of learn those lessons over time. I think he's going to be a really, really, really good quarterback. He's a good to very good quarterback right now. He's still just forcing some stuff. And there was a run where it was like a third down run maybe. And right at the yard to gain, he tried to do a spin move, and someone came from behind, like caught him from behind and just drilled him. And it's like, boy, I don't think they're going to want him taking many hits like that, because you can tell there is going to be a drop off if Cade McNamara comes in for JJ McCarthy. They are not going to want Cade McNamara or JJ McCarthy taking that kind of a hit. So I wonder if that impacts their run game a little bit, where I bet, as they're watching that film this week, they're saying, you better get your butt down on the ground, because we can't have you taking hits like that, because, you knock him out of the game. I think that changes this Michigan offense quite a bit, and not in a good way.
Well, look at how many times he's able to escape and keep a play alive or pick up a third down. That's not necessarily what Cade McNamara could do. And at this point, I don't even know even Cade McNamara's situation. But yeah, they need to keep JJ McCarthy healthy. There was the pass to Ronnie Bell that was basically a tie goes to the runner, where the defender had it, and Ronnie Bell, like, it was basically through the defender's hands and into Ronnie Bell's chest, and Ronnie Bell had no choice but to catch it and take it away from the defender. That was a dangerous one, and we see that, and JJ McCarthy's gotten away with it a couple of times. The fear for Michigan is you're not going to get away with all of these, and that one cost them a little bit. I also wonder how much he's being, let's say, hindered, like the receivers are, by the routes and the offense. For instance, the play before the blocked field goal, Michigan had a 3rd and goal, and they went with the max protect. So they only sent 3 receivers out, and Indiana dropped 8, dropped 7 or 8. So it's 3 receivers trying to get open against 7 defenders. Like, everybody is double covered and a third, basically, where there was just nowhere to go. And there could be, I'm assuming, better designs for those situations. And is that a lack of trust in your quarterback? Like, you want to give him fewer reads, and is that a lack of trust in the offensive line, where you want to give McCarthy more time? It didn't work against what Indiana did, and you'd think maybe spreading the Indiana offense out more would be more effective, but still some of that is against Jim Harbaugh's collegiate beliefs, at least.
Well, and another thing that kind of limits them, I think, is just, you mentioned they don't throw the ball downfield that much. Here are 3 of their leading receivers for the game. Ronnie Bell, 11 catches for 121 yards. So that's 11 yards a catch, which is it's fine. That is definitely not big play. That is just sort of keep the chains moving. 46 yards of that was after the catch. So you're just constantly throwing. That's 6 yards away from the line of scrimmage on average. Luke Schoonmaker, 9 catches for 67 yards, 32 after the catch. So on average, he's catching it 4 yards downfield. Cornelius Johnson, 4 catches, 58 yards, 33 after the catch. So again, it's 6 yards downfield. You're compressing the defense there, and that makes things a little harder. Where if the defense doesn't feel, we talk about spread a lot in terms of spreading sideline to sideline and forcing the defense to defend the whole field horizontally. If they don't really feel like they've got to defend things vertically, that compresses the defense as well and makes it a little more challenging. The reason it's so hard to throw in the red zone is because there's no threat of taking the top off the defense, throwing deep and throwing over someone's head. Michigan is really not throwing over anyone's head right now. And, how much is McCarthy, they don't trust him to do that? How much of that is they just haven't felt the need to do that? How much of that is they don't know that they have the receivers who could necessarily do that? I think we'll find out more probably next week against Penn State, but that Penn State secondary is pretty good. One of my concerns for Michigan would be if they can't take the top off that Penn State defense next week, how does that limit them in terms of their offense?
Yeah, because Penn State will just continue to shrink and shrink that, the 10-yard area where Michigan is trying to get those short passes. And even the Cornelius Johnson had a 29-yard touchdown catch, but that was mostly a catch and run, as you're talking about the yards after catch there. And, they tried to get the ball to A.J. Henning early on. Slot receiver had 3 targets, 1 catch. Just, it doesn't necessarily work when they try to do that. And Andrell Anthony, 2 catches for 32 yards. He can disappear for weeks at a time. You never really know what you're going to get from them. Just anything else from the offense? I thought they looked pretty good when they were doing some hurry up stuff. I like JJ McCarthy in that. I think there's still some trust issues, and maybe it's just, let's let him learn and build up some confidence, and we can build up our trust in him. But I think obviously he needs to get better with the deep stuff. He only took 1 shot downfield, and it was an overthrow. Ronnie Bell missed a couple of blocks. That was a little surprising for him. Generally this is a pretty good blocking team because they have to be. But again, everybody was affected by what happened with Mike Hart. Anything else on offense?
I thought the offensive line did a pretty good job. They were, McCarthy does a good job avoiding pressure when there is pressure. But the line, especially in the second half, you could very clearly see them wearing the Indiana defensive front down. And Indiana does not have the deepest defense, so we'll see how well that works against a Penn State type defensive line this week. But on the whole, really both sides of it, and we'll get to the defense in a minute. The offensive line was not as dominant as the defensive line. Let's put it that way. But they were still pretty good.
Right tackle Trente Jones taken off. Jim Harbaugh said after the game looks like a high ankle sprain, so that's going to be something to monitor certainly this week and moving forward. They have a bye week, I believe, after the Penn State game this week, so coming at a good time. Defensively for Michigan, they held Indiana to 19 yards rushing, and quarterback Connor Bazelak, 25 of 49 for 203 yards, 1 touchdown, an interception, and 7 sacks. And the way they got after him in the fourth quarter and in the second quarter at the end of the half, it was impressive. They really made his life miserable, and it was like everybody took their turn. It was Mike Morse getting in there. It was the freshman Derek Moore. Braden McGregor had one at the end. And of course, Iyabi Oki was in there as well. It's like everybody, okay, calling number 18, and then the 18 would go in and get sacked. And then calling number 17 would go get the sack. And they kept Connor Bazelak pretty busy, especially in that fourth quarter.
This was one of these games where you watch the game and you go look at the box score and you're like, that can't be right. How many tackles and sacks was Jalen Harrell credited with in the box score, Tony?
Was it just 1 sack?
It was 2 tackles for loss and 1 sack, and it was like, no. I have 5 times I've written down that Jalen Harrell is eating people's souls. That can't be right. So yes, he may have gotten stiffed a little bit on the box score, or just on a technicality someone else got it. But man, he was really impressive. The whole defense was really impressive. This is watching the Michigan defense. It reminded me a lot of the Ohio State defense against Michigan State, where you were really impressed with the fact that they didn't give up or anything on the ground, really. Michigan, Indiana had a couple runs where it was it was 11 yards, 15 yards, whatever. But they didn't really do much, and they just swarmed Connor Bazelak all game. He was just constantly under fire. And, one of the things we'll talk about when we do our Ohio State rewatch tomorrow, spoiler alert, there was a lot of different guys getting pressure for Ohio State. It was the same thing for Michigan. Michigan was just constantly just different guys. Someone was in there in his face every snap, it seemed like. and it was constantly different guys. And that's not a bad thing for a defense to not just have, here's the guy you got to watch out for, because you can double the guy you got to watch out for, or chip him with a running back or a tight end or something. If it's coming from everywhere, that's a lot more of a problem. And they just had such consistent pressure that it felt like, they weren't running the ball much in the second half. And when Connor Bazelak wasn't, didn't have someone dragging him to the ground, he was just, how many times was he just on his back foot and just floating a ball into the stands? It felt like there were like 3 or 4 of those at least where, even when the rush didn't get there, the rush affected him because he was hearing footsteps and seeing ghosts for pretty much the whole second half. It was, Indiana in the first half was, had 3 long sustained drives. And it was like, oh boy, this is, they had a 10-play 76-yard drive, a 12-play 52-yard drive, an 11-play 74-yard drive out of their first 5. And, we talk all the time about how teams sustaining drives against your defense is like, that's a little bit of red flag where it's like, well, if there's a bust and a guy slips, like, okay, it happens, whatever. If teams are sustaining drives, that's like a little bit of a concern. And, watching the first half versus the second half, that was 2 different defenses. It felt like it was like they couldn't get off the field in the first half, and in the second half, it was just like you could give Indiana 8 quarters and they would not score any points in the second half.
Yeah, they definitely got after it. The way they did get after them in that second half, it made me go back and look at all of the Michigan sacks this year to see when they were happening, Tom. And if I tell you that the Jalen Harrell first quarter sack on 2nd and 9 was just the second time this year that a Michigan defensive lineman sacked a quarterback in a non-obvious passing situation. Would that surprise you?
I guess what that would tell me is, based on how many times I've seen Michigan get after the quarterback this year, I guess they've put teams in a lot of obvious passing situations, because it feels like they've really gotten to a lot of quarterbacks this year. That's a really interesting stat.
Yeah, and then I went and looked like, well, is that how normal is that? So I went and looked at Ohio State, who only have Michigan has 22 sacks on the year. Ohio State has 14 sacks on the year, but like half of Ohio State's sacks have come from the defensive line and non-obvious passing situations. And by non-obvious passing situations, I mean like 1st and 2nd down, and not in the final minutes or the final quarter of, you're down by 4 touchdowns and you're just throwing it. So I was surprised because I wanted to see exactly when these sacks are happening. And Mike Morris is one of the reasons why, because I remember him getting after it in several games this year, but it was like late in the games. And this is another one where, he had a second quarter sack, but it was at the end of the half where Indiana's trying to throw the ball to get down the field. And I think he has kind of dominated a little bit. He had two sacks last week, or 2 sacks last week against Iowa. One was in the 4th quarter when Iowa was trying to score. The other one was on 3rd and 21. And I don't know if I'm making too much of that. Not that I've made anything of it yet. It's just something that's like, oh, that's interesting. And is it one of these things where Ohio State's defensive line sometimes will just, crash down to free things up for the linebackers? Linebackers are an issue for Michigan, by the way, but to free things up and not really worry about sacking the quarterback on early downs. Or are those some of those early downs all of the hurries that we also saw that aren't really, tallied or charted, certainly not by me in this instance, but maybe have to go back and see how many of those hurries are on 1st and 2nd down, non-obvious pass situations. But you would think they would get home more unless that's not their number one, role or duty in those instances. And we don't know that, but just, again, an interesting number, a low number, certainly. I don't know what to make of it, but we have to make something of it because that's kind of what we do here, or at least what I do.
Yeah, right before half, they put a graphic on the screen that said Michigan had 16 pressures and 4 sacks on 37 dropbacks, and that was kind of right before the half. So more than half of the snaps, they were recording some kind of a pressure. Now, on the final stat sheet, they only recorded 4 quarterback hurries for the whole game. So obviously, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there, but watching the game, it sure felt like more like 16 and a half than 4 in the whole game. It was just, they were just constantly there. And, you don't have to get the quarterback to the ground every time to really change the game. And they definitely did that throughout the game. It feels to me like they're protecting that back seven and making that. I still have questions about the back seven of the Michigan defense a little bit. You had a couple defensive pass interference calls where, Indiana's receivers are fine, but Indiana's receivers are not. Michigan's going to face better receivers this weekend. Michigan's going to face much better receivers on Thanksgiving weekend. And it just seemed like, I don't know, there's a little panic or a little just, they were not, Michigan's defense just feels like it's not really getting tested downfield that much. And we saw last year the combination of the weather and the pass rush kind of limit Ohio State's downfield passing attack. And we'll see if that defensive front really is good enough to do that again this year. But I think if I have a concern about Michigan, I think that's it. It's the back seven of the defense, which just feels very much untested so far.
I think this may have been DJ Turner's worst game. He had a couple of interferences, had a bad missed tackle. And one of those pass interference penalties was him just running down the field on the sideline with the receiver, pushing the receiver out of bounds like 4 or 5 times, like pushing him as the ref is watching him. And the flag was thrown there. I do wonder, and the reason I talk about the obvious passing situations is because when you face an offense like Ohio State's, who can do whatever, whenever, there are no obvious pass. There aren't as many obvious pass situations because 1st and 10 is just as likely to be a pass as 3rd and 2, or So it's like if Michigan doesn't know that, okay, this is definitely a pass, like how effective can they be on those first downs when Ohio State is throwing the ball? I think they're going to have to prove some things there, but they have a number of guys that are growing and getting better, as we've seen. Linebackers, I know Junior Colson and Michael Barrett, the 2 starting linebackers, both had sacks in this one on blitzes. Sometimes they can just get caught up in the wash, and maybe that's, if the defensive line is trying to keep them clean, they're not always doing a very good job of it. I'll say that, but also there's some poor picking and choosing on the holes and stopping a running game. A running game, as I said, that managed 19 yards. So the linebackers must be doing something right, and the defensive line must be doing something right. But Michigan has not faced a team that can run the ball yet this year. When Maryland is the best looking run team that Michigan has faced this year, and Maryland averages about, 170 yards rushing a game or something like that. They're the 5 yards a carry, which is fine. But like when that's the best rushing team you faced this year, you haven't faced anybody. So we'll see more. But overall, defensively, hard to get too nitpicky. I try. Hard to get too nitpicky about what they did in this one.
Well, and you sort of wonder, what are they going to do against Penn State this weekend? Because I think Penn State is not a tremendous offense, but it's going to be the best offense they've faced, I think, but at least overall. And Penn State, the running backs for Penn State feel kind of like a little all or nothing, where, you're going to stop Nick Singleton 9 times for 3 yards or less, and then he's going to run for 65 yards. And, maybe the passing game can get the ball downfield a little bit. They have talent in that wide receiver room. Sean Clifford is what he is at this point. Looking ahead to that game, who do you think wins that game? Because I feel much more confident in my answer now than I did before I rewatched the Indiana game.
Oh, really? I think Penn State can do some things that can make this a 4-quarter game. Ends up being like a 31-27, 28-24 type thing. Being in Ann Arbor, I'm going to side with Michigan, but I think Michigan better be on upset alert in this one.
It's possible that Penn State beats them. Looking at Michigan controlling the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, that just, to me, with as much as the offensive line has been kind of a consistent concern with Penn State for like a decade now, the Michigan pass rush, the Michigan run defense, that just feels like that might be what decides this game. watching Michigan control the trenches again on both sides of the ball against Indiana, I feel like, Penn State probably can't rely on just hitting a home run in the run game. And I don't think they're going to be able to run it for consistently 4, 5, 6 yards. I think you're going to have a bunch of 2s and 3s and then a 50. And I don't know that necessarily gets it done against Michigan. So I think I am more confident in Michigan winning and potentially winning by 10 to 13 kind of points. I don't think they're winning 42-10 or anything like that, but 31-20 or 34-24 or something like that. That seems like maybe where this one's headed this weekend.
Michigan or the Penn State wide receivers have just 5 catches of 30 or more yards this season, which is less than Abuka with 6 and Marvin Harrison with 6. So something to keep in mind there as well. I will also say freshman defensive tackle Mason Graham coming on, looking good. Let's see, anything else in there? Well, some other stuff. I'll write about it in Michigan Monday. Some up-tempo issues as well. When Michigan has to face the up-tempo stuff, you can get some hits on there. But anything else before we go, Tom?
There were a couple terrible penalties in that game. Like there was a ridiculous unsportsmanlike penalty on Jalen Harrell after a sack at one point. There was a terrible unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on an IU defensive back on the sidelines. There was one that Joel Klatt was railing about in the game that he's right about, which was an illegal substitution penalty where the refs just didn't hold the snap. Like, that was good. Come on, gang. Like, let's get it together. And this was not one where it was like, oh, the calls are favoring one team. It was like, no, this is just a bad day for the officiating crew. That was not outstanding. That was some brilliant stuff by Michigan to what they would do is Indiana would substitute, but still want to hurry up on offense. And so Michigan would substitute the furthest guy on the field, and he would jog to the sideline so that the rest of the defense could get a look at what's going on. And one of the times, the refs will always stand by the ball and let that guy get off the field. And one of the times, like, he didn't. The ref was like, "No, I'm done with this," and walked off. And then they snapped it, and the guy hadn't left the field yet, so Michigan got flagged with the 12 men on the field. The other, the throat slash, which wasn't a throat slash, it was a finger smell. I don't know exactly what the celebration was. It was not a throat slash. It was like, and you're watching it. I'm like, what did they think that was? Because whatever they thought it was not. It was just like, but what if we let the kids play and what if the kids had fun and got some fresh air and exercise and got to express themselves a little bit? Would that be the worst thing in the world? And the Big Ten ref said, yes, that would be the worst thing in the world. All right. That will do it. Just the worst. It's, football can only be fun to a point, and then we got to nip it in the bud. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing with this show. Can't have too much fun here. So I want to thank you all for joining us. A reminder, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you'd like to become a member, we would very much enjoy that. So check that out. Join for a month. Check us out on the message board. Say hello and say a bunch more. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Go ahead and subscribe there. Hit the bell to be notified. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up on this video as you're watching it now, which will help us and help others see us. So that will do it for today. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.